I remember very vividly when I walked over to have one of the most difficult conversations in my life as a founder. It was the kind of conversation you never really consider when you start a business. I was about to give some very hard feedback, the kind you prefer not to give, ever. I keep thinking about this and other difficult conversations, which we tend to associate only bad feelings with. Why do our worst moments stick with us for so long when we'd rather pretend they didn't happen? Maybe it's because it's these moments that have the potential energy to shape us for life. We can look back at them as mistakes, but they are really little turning points where we learn something about ourselves. They give us pause to reflect if this is really how we want to show up when things get tough. What you can learn from them is compassion, acceptance that your view is only one of many, that the other person has a perspective that's just as valid as yours. And you learn to do the work that reduces the need to have these conversations in the first place. Or you can come at the conversation from an angle of partnership, of wanting to figure out together what the best way forward is. My past self at times thought that only I saw the true and full picture, that only I knew what to do. The sad thing is that once a person starts thinking and acting this way, others are likely to follow in their steps. That's how conflicts can get messy, draining energy to the point where the only way forward is to go separate ways. I like to think I've gotten better at all of this, but truth is that these conversations don't really get any easier. Maybe I've accepted that the work is both on yourself and on the relationship you have with the other person. That's where the focus should be. A difficult conversation is less so when you can have it as partners, as equals, as humans. This is what Sarah and I are talking about today. What those conversations are, how we can have them, and we share what our own tense moments have been.
Hello, Matthias.
Hi, Sarah. We are today talking about difficult conversations, which, you and I have had plenty of, both with each other and also with the folks that we've been working with. And speaking for me, it's a topic that's coming up quite a bit in my coaching conversations. How about yourself?
Yes, I have had my fair share of difficult conversations. We have had difficult conversations. It does come up in coaching in different ways. Sometimes it's about feedback, which can be difficult, or difficult, news to share, or you know, critical parts of the business. So,
Mm.
looking forward to jumping in.
Do you, not for going too deep into any of the conversations that we've had, but what are the general themes that come to mind?
Yeah, I think a lot of the difficult conversations I've had to have in my career and also just my personal life um, center around usually misaligned expectations, I kind of want to say,
Mm.
where either context is off or, expectations are certainly have have drifted apart. Yeah, any time when I'm going into a difficult conversation and I feel this thing in my chest and this tightness and this stress about what I'm gonna say, what I need to say, what I hope is heard. Um, any number of those things just bring a level of stress and a level of heightened awareness into that conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
You feeling it? You remembering?
I have very vivid memories of quite a few conversations. Stakes seemed very high for them. One that comes to mind was the first time I had to tell someone on my team that what they're doing is not okay. And, if that continues to happen, there are consequences on the horizon. Laying people off is just one of the most unpleasant conversations you could have, I would argue. I can't imagine how difficult that must be on the receiving end, but even just having to have this conversation, preparing for it, and managing the emotions that go into it, it's just probably one of the more painful experiences I've had. And I think the other ones that come to mind for me were conversations with co-founders where the relationship was very challenged,
Yep.
where I didn't have the right tools or experience to resolve the tensions or conflicts or even bring these to a productive conversation, and I just kept trying things and they didn't work. Even thinking about these conversations now, and even if I would have them today, I'm not sure they would be any easier.
Yep.
But at least, even from the coaching practice and processing all of this stuff over years now, I would think I could prepare better for them, but I'm pretty sure, like, even then, they would still be churning stomachs. And everything else, just the desire to run away.
Yep.
I think one vivid memory I have, I walked to one of these conversations with a co-founder, and I forced myself to smile, which just felt so wrong in the moment. But I needed to force some happiness hormones to flow to just move me into a slightly better and slightly more productive place. That I
Yeah.
could feel readier for
Change
this
the
conversation.
energy. Yeah.
Yeah, other conversations have just done power poses and things like that, just to get a minimum, serotonin and dopamine flowing so that you can push past some of the nervousness.
Yeah.
Ah, these are just
Uh,
fun things to think about.
Memories, right? I mean, I was just thinking about what you and I experienced. We had to do some layoffs together, and I still vividly remember the all team meeting. And then obviously all of the individual conversations, all the preparation, and then the conversations after, not just that day, but days and weeks after, and just how that felt, and how, individually, how individuals were processing it. Yeah, and another difficult conversation. I remember when I came in as an executive leader to a team, and we had to have a pretty big shift in direction in our strategy with the product. Understandably so, the existing, the team members who were there were really frustrated and angry with, this change and this shift, and trying to understand it. And we definitely could have rolled that out in hindsight a lot differently. And that's, yeah, that's part of, you know, these experiences, right? That we're talking about, whether it's with a co-founder, with a team, or with layoffs, or giving difficult feedback to a team member, or even to a boss.
Mm.
It's never, it's never easy. I think what changes now is how I prepare, but I still get anxious. I still get that little pit in my stomach, even as a coach.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing you mentioned about, like, even just these layoffs that we went through, and the conversations that happened after. It's usually a much longer arc because emotions need to be managed, not just, my own, but of the folks who are still there, who,
Yeah.
have to battle their own survivorship bias, just wondering why they're still here when other people have left. Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made that, especially when it comes to these difficult conversations, it's not just
Right.
one conversation. One conversation is barely enough.
Right.
I think maybe just going through difficult conversations as like a theme. You already mentioned, giving a team bad news,
Yep.
um, giving uncomfortable feedback, or laying someone off, firing someone, telling
Yep.
someone, when their probationary period is finished, they're not gonna get a full-time job. Giving crucial feedback to your boss, which is an interesting one that always comes up for me when I do speed coaching at leadership conferences, where, especially with senior leaders who just don't know how to give their boss feedback that also lands. I think the most common one that I come across these days in my coaching practice, like someone came in, someone who was an engineering leader and said their product counterpart is not understanding certain technical concepts and technical ideas, and that product counterpart should really just do their work to educate themselves. And, that was the expectation. But as to your earlier point, like that expectation was never really set. Like it's was just increasing levels of frustration.
I This comes up in coaching so often, which is and it's come up in my career as a product person. Just like they don't get it.
Hmm.
Like someone will
They
come
don't.
into,
Yes.
like the engineer saying the product person doesn't get it, the product person saying that this person doesn't get it,
Yeah.
or X doesn't get it, or the boss doesn't get it. And I always dive in. I'm like, what do you mean what's it?
Hmm.
Let's
What you
unpeel this. Yeah, what?
Yeah, and once you've unpeeled the onion, what you just explained to me, why can't you say that to them? Then problem solved. At least they understand what you understand.
Right, right.
Uh, but yeah, that's work, right? That means you have to do something. You have to go to that person,
Yeah,
almost move across this hump that's now there, where you both know something is between you, and well, maybe just address this plainly. It's like, hey, I know it's been weird between us, and I would like to, uh, help resolve this situation. And I've had the feeling that you didn't fully understand some of the concepts that we have here, and if that is assumption is indeed the case, I would like to explain those to you, right? If you're open, like.
right.
But anyway, I mean, we're almost solving this situation already. I think one you also mentioned was like communicating a decision or getting people on board, where they're going to have concerns. There is resistance. For example, like a change in direction, or shipping schedules, or return to office mandates, where that come with the added caveat that there's usually no rational reason why leaders want people back in the office. And so it's just communicated as a mandate, leaving middle managers pretty much in a bind.
Yep,
Or
yep.
the newest thing is, we have hiring freezes, and instead more work needs to be done using AI instead of
Right.
hiring. And it's just like, why? I think that one came up quite a few times, where especially middle managers were stuck having to explain to their teams decisions that they themselves were not on board with.
Sure, sure.
And also didn't, even from senior leadership, didn't get any context or reasoning why this decision was made.
Right.
So
Yeah, should we pick one and kind of talk through some of the things that we might do to prepare, or
let's
like,
do that.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Um, I mean, I'm just gonna. There's an easier one, which is giving a team bad news, which is
Mm.
not necessarily easy per se. But I mean, there are varying levels of bad news, right?
Yep.
There. I mean, layoffs are probably the worst kind of news that you could give, but beyond that, bad news could also be where there's a change in direction, and all of the work that you've been doing for the last 2 or 3 months is basically has been for naught.
Right.
That can be bad news as well. How does it feel to go into a conversation like this?
We're human, right? So we have emotions. So like it just feels yeah, there's a nervousness, there's a worry, there's an anxiety. I might not sleep as well the night before. I need to consciously do those things that you talked about, whether just before the call I might do some push-ups just to shift my energy in my body. I'll definitely do some power poses. The crazier the better. I go into those conversations, and it really depends on the context, right? Is it a conversation with an individual, with a whole team? In the case of, shifting strategy or shifting feedback, most likely you're talking to a team of people.
Hmm.
In those cases, I always think like, you know, can I roll this out in the most gentle and like respectful way? Now, sometimes you just have to just say it in front of a whole group of people, and you can't have pre conversations, you can't have pre meetings, it just depends. But ideally, I've been able to, bring, a group of people into the decision and work with those people around the decision, around the change, what that means, why we're doing it, what that means for the existing work and the existing people and the existing team. Um, and then those people, become support for me, right? And support for others.
Hmm.
But that's in, bigger organizations. Sometimes it's, that's a luxury you don't have. It's a smaller group, it's a smaller startup, a smaller team. Um, you know, I I prepare, like I write down everything, like script it out. Um, I and I will script out sentence by sentence what I plan to say. I will also try to imagine in advance the difficult questions that might come up, and I
Hmm.
try to answer those. I will rehearse, even if it's just me reading my my script, and practice a a bunch of times. I have brought in others into the conversation, like Matthias, you and I were able to do this when we were working together at Reaction Commerce. We could work on our scripts together. We could, really like practice. And I think one thing that we did that I've carried forward is different people require more context or different context, or because they have more tenure in the company, or they have, different levels of experience, or they're going to be impacted differently. So of course, like what we share and how we talk with those individuals needs to adjust. It really, to me, is like the more I prepare, the more I practice, the more I script it out,
Yeah.
the better I feel going into the conversation. I mean, a little bit less anxious. Yeah, it's just some of the things I try to do.
Hmm. Yeah, I think for me, I always think about, especially when it comes to bad news, is staying ahead of anything like gossip or rumors developing once a certain news is shared, right? And some of that is, or maybe all of that, a lot of that is the preparation, as you mentioned, just thinking about as many of the people who are present, what they might be worried about,
Yeah.
uh, addressing those questions, right? I think for me, in the like at the tail end of my CTO work, like any announcements already had an FAQ section. Right? It's like, this is why this is happening. This, or here's a question that someone could ask. It does show, and it is important that as you prepare for sharing these news, that you think about, how this actually impacts the team, and it does have the added benefit that you stay ahead in terms of gossip and rumors. And I think especially when it comes to layoff, I think we had a spreadsheet that was, in some cases timed to the minute, linking out to different Google Docs of, what is being said in this conversation. Like, who are we talking to first? And why, and who are we talking to next? And then just mapping all of that out.
Yeah.
Um, and it did have the benefit of thinking about from all possible angles, what are the scenarios that could happen, right? What if someone from a team doesn't join this all hands call? What if someone, yeah, just isn't present? What do we do? Like, we
Yep.
can't let
Someone's
that
out.
linger.
Someone's out that day. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to find a way to address that. And so we can't plan it to, to the umpteenth detail, but at least, you get into a mindset where, for me as a former developer, I always like to have a plan B. I think that's, for me, that's the most important thing. When there's a plan B, I feel comfortable with plan A. Like, if plan A doesn't work out, we'll just do something else. And we've prepared for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that preparation is a common theme.
Yep.
And And putting yourself into the other person's shoes. I think that's one as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to go there, which is like even with the preparation, we're still powerless over the individual's response, right?
Yeah.
So, even with as much hand holding and sincerity and empathy and preparation and spreadsheets and, as plan A and plan B, we still have to give space and time for the individual to respond. And so that means, in the moment there can be emotions. I'm always afraid of those emotions. Is there going to be some sort of anger or
Yeah.
or
Or
dis
sadness or like all of it.
sadness,
Like,
any of it? Yeah. And then, in time, is there going to be, fallout, like
mm,
not only with that individual, which is understandable in some ways, and but also with the rest of the team. I feel like I'm concerned, and I'm also afraid of this have a ripple effect, that more conflict will happen from it, and how to think about that, and how to you know give space for that emotion, but also to try to prevent the conflict from escalating. What's the balance of obviously sharing this feedback, having the difficult conversation, giving space for the person to digest it and to respond and to have sadness or worry or anger, but
yeah.
then also to ensure that it's not causing too much conflict and it's not escalating unnecessarily, right?
And sometimes that is exactly why you need to have a difficult conversation, right? So that keeping it from escalating. The fear of how the other person might respond or react. They might get angry at us. They might quit. I think that's a fear, especially when you give someone feedback that is maybe not as pleasant. It's a
Yeah.
team member that you value highly, and you're afraid that they might leave because of this conversation. Or, as I said, there's these ripple effects, even, or it tarnishes your reputation, right? In some way, like people are going to be mad at you for being laid off, which absolutely is a fair right to be. And also, in the same way, you have to put yourself out there and say, well, we made a mistake here, right? Like we made certain assumptions about how this would go. It didn't go that way. And this is unfortunately what needs to happen now.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a high vulnerability element to a lot of this as well, which almost brings us to the next type of conversations, is giving feedback to someone, especially the more difficult kind, right? It's usually easy to give someone positive or reinforcing feedback, although for me, as a German, it's something I had to get used to. Was very uncomfortable to me in the beginning when people asked me for that. That changed over time. But giving someone feedback on something that hasn't worked, right, or
Right.
certain expectations that they haven't met, when giving them feedback like this, unless we really know from the past, like from past conversations, that this person is going to take that feedback and do something with it, change something about their approach, change something about their work, how they interact with other people. Well, unless we have that experience, we just never know how they will respond. I had one client who had a conflict with someone on the marketing side, and they asked me, like, so if I want to just go into this conversation and just tell them how they're wrong, I was like, well, tell me about how they're wrong and why you're right, and describe like how what you even think their perspective is, like what is their stance. And
Right.
that usually goes into, well, I think something about bad intentions, right? Some making assumptions about what their motivations are, making assumptions about why they're doing something, and what they want to achieve with that, which are usually not founded in the reality. They're founded in the frustrations that you have about the situation. That it is just, why can't they just do their thing? Why can't I just do my thing? And somehow that automatically lines up and everybody's going to be happy, even though you already know this is not the reality based on recent experience, which is, led us to
Right.
this coaching conversation.
Right. Right.
you assume that whatever you're doing is the right way,
Right, right, right.
right? And however
Uh,
you see the world is the correct view of the world, and how
yeah,
they're viewing it is obviously wrong.
yeah. I've
And I
seen
think that,
this. I've seen this as well so many times where someone's just adamant, like they're right. This is the feedback. They have to give this feedback. They're ready to just, you know, jump in. And I'm always of the like, let's first pause for a second, and understand, is this feedback, is it a personal grievance? What led to this situation? What context has been shared or has not been shared? I mean, what information does the person giving the feedback have that the person receiving the feedback or will be receiving the feedback have?
yeah.
What context is missing? What's contributed to lead to this situation that we're in? Uh,
Hmm.
and I think just spending, you know, some time really with with the person who's ready to give that feedback, who's convinced that they need to give this feedback, that they have to share difficult news, that this person's done something wrong, or they're not contributing, or they're not meeting expectations. So it's like, okay, well, let's understand that a little bit more.
Hmm.
And I think that's where I've always felt like there's been the most growth for me individually, as well as, for the hopefully for the folks that I coach. But just taking that bit of time to almost put yourselves in the shoes of the other, like, okay,
Yeah.
what's contributing to this,
Hmm.
and I think that always really helps, and kind of just sets the conversation up more as equals rather than as this person who is the right and in the wrong. Like that's not
Yeah.
really the way to approach it, right?
I think very early on in my coaching career, I talked to an engineering leader, and somehow this became a theme. Like within weeks, I had several of these conversations that started with something like, I have someone on my team who's not performing, and how do I tell them? Right? And so, underlying that is the assumption that you fully understand, what does performance look like, which is, I mean, putting aside that this is an inherently difficult thing to assess, especially in engineering, but also elsewhere. Um, it's very subjective. I usually go into like a couple of follow-on questions just to actually, as you said, to get the person to take several steps back, not just one, and take them back to the beginning, whatever the beginning is. The beginning could have been beginning of the project, beginning of the quarter. It could have been the beginning of when this person started working here. This ties back to something that you said very early on. It's like, does this person know what's expected of them? Like whatever measure you have in your head, which is usually where it is, about productivity, do they know that this is how they're being assessed? Right? So like at that point it was, well, they're committing less code than other people, or they're contributing to fewer pull requests than other folks, or they don't seem to be working as many hours as everybody else, right? There's always a comparative element to other folks, which is usually driven by output. That's a
Right.
slightly different thing.
Yeah.
But there's a set of expectation. There's a certain measurement that somebody needs to live up to. And
Yep.
then more often than not, that measurement was never really communicated, right? And then communicated, and then the other person also had an opportunity to say, well, A, this is realistic. Yes, I can do this. Or can we adjust this or this or that? We are at the point now where everything seems to be really bad. And now you need to give that person the feedback. Right? And what should have happened maybe along the way is like, so then the follow-on question is like, does this person know that they are not living up to these expectations?
Right.
Right? That's the
Has feedback
second question.
shared. Right.
Yeah, that's feedback that would have been, if you think back through the entire arc of however you got here, earlier on, this would have been a lot easier to give, right?
Right.
And when everybody understands what they're supposed to do and has agreed on that, that's also easier to do. I think in our book, we talk a little bit about rethinking accountability from a different angle, which always starts with setting expectations, right?
Right.
And setting expectations in a way that is not top down, or not, at least not completely top down, but at least it's a conversation, right? It's like I at least have an opportunity to say, yes, this is realistic, this isn't realistic, this, here's why, etc., etc. And then we can maybe, twiddle some knobs, and then, we both of us rubber stamp it, and we're off. I'm sometimes marveling at the fact how often all of this comes back to unspoken expectations.
Right.
Because, like, there's a fear of spelling those out. This very common thing is people, managers or founders, thinking that their team should just get it. They should just, like, intuitively know what
Right.
is common sense and apply that. But then common sense is, different to everybody.
Yeah.
It's just interesting, like, how it all comes back to that, and how easy it would be to just spell those out. Whatever assumptions we have, being able to question those, as you said, preparing for feedback, preparing for difficult conversations, not letting them turn into grievances, but rather trying to understand, why did we assume this to be true? What are the expectations that are hidden in there? And then going into the conversation with a level of curiosity of, these were my expectations. Were they realistic? What did
Yeah.
you expect? What did you assume to be true?
Right. Right. Yeah. What happens often is, because we don't have these steps along the way where we're checking in with each other, where we're sharing feedback as it happens, it's building up, right? And so then there's this big difficult conversation where um I think the tendency is to kind of like throw the kitchen sink in with everything. It's like
Mm,
there's this pile on aspect, and I always try to coach. That's not going to be productive, first off. So you kind of have to start with the discussion with, you know, 2, 3 max facts. They can't be opinions. They can't be, like, hey, I want to just go back to this moment. Here's my understanding. Try to understand what you have in common, about that situation. Learn more from where the other person is coming from, what they heard, what their motivations, what their assumptions were, and what their expectations were around this this factual event or this factual project. And in order to move that to something that's constructive, you have to, have that empathy. You have to have that, like, trying to understand where they're coming from,
mm,
find a part of the conversation that you both agreed on, and then build upon that. It's always difficult because these things fester. Um,
mm.
sometimes even after the conversation, especially if there's 2 or 3 or 4, multiple examples of frustration building and where feedback hasn't been given, you're not current in that relationship.
Yeah.
It just becomes so difficult. The sentence we use the most in our relationship, Matthias, and then also it's front and center in our book, but it's we're here now, which is,
Mm,
we can't change the past. We nothing we can do about it. All we can really do is, as leaders and as people and as humans, okay, acknowledge that, we're here now
yeah.
and we have work to do. We have work to do to mend this relationship, to move forward, to lead differently or to manage differently. That's the agency we have. We can all
Yeah.
control what we do next. We can't control what we did, yesterday.
Yeah. I think there's one side why sometimes we err on the side of just blowing things up, telling someone else they're wrong and assuming we're right, is it is a lot of work. It's easier to just assume you're just going to have this one conversation and everything's going to be great after you've blown it all up.
Yep.
um Maybe that adds a barrier to going into conversations like this, where it's like, can't we just all get along, can't we just all focus on the work,
Right. Right.
right? But then the work is a result of, a complex mesh of people who don't know each other, but somehow have to work together and manage not just their own emotional state, but that of, well, whoever else they're interacting with.
Right.
That's just an interestingly complex system, right? And there are relationships that need maintenance, nurturing. Um, That's one side. I think that the other side of what you said is going into a conversation and, just retracing steps, trying to find the point where you diverged. Um, and again, like also assuming that your perspective is not the only truth. And also maybe even just acknowledging in this conversation that, you contributed something to getting to this place, right? That to the conflict, to the tension, that is not something that the other person did. And even just starting like we're here now, I would like to get us to a place where we can work together without all of this stuff that happened in the past. That can actually make the conversation a lot less daunting. Right?
Yeah.
If you go into a conversation like that, like, okay, my one goal for this conversation is I want to understand what the other person assumed, expected, all of that. Right? That's
Yep.
my goal. And ideally I can share mine and then that's it. But at least it lowers the stakes because you're not yelling at someone, you're not telling them how they're wrong. Um you're just,
Yeah.
going in, admitting some fault that, can even soften the conversation right from the get-go. Right? It's like if I'm being yelled at, I'm immediately going into the fight or flight response. If I'm being, somebody comes to me and says, well, I did this thing and we're somehow stuck in this rut and I would like us to get out of it. Would you like that too?
Right.
I mean, I can still say no. That's certainly a possibility, but at least
Sure.
everything softens usually. And then you can start something that's hopefully more productive.
Right. Right. Sometimes it just needs time as well. It's like just,
That is true.
hey, how about we check back in tomorrow or, after the weekend, and time gives some perspective and some softening to a situation.
Agreed.
Yeah.
For a second part for the first
You
real
just
talk.
jumped into difficult conversations. Why not?
There were several conversations in this realm that I've been talking to clients about.
True that. All right.